Drop it.
Well, welcome back, my passive income investors. I like to an extremely touchy subject video. If you do not have moral fortitude, you shouldn't be investing in the markets anyways, let alone watching this video. I am also not a financial advisor, guys, but I have been using this strategy to make more than $50,000 in equity gains over the last 5 years. And this is a beautiful strategy that molds very well to cost average dividend investors out there. And it has to do with what I call the big six. Well, what are the big six? These are the six conglomerates that control 90% of the media we consume. And it's absolutely crazy how we get caught up in their narrative, not realizing that what they talk about doesn't always represent what is actually going on in reality. And I find it almost sickening that these are the companies that will no longer give a face to people that plague our society and do horrific acts because we don't want to villainize them and kind of give them the celebrity-like status, showing them on TV all the time. But in the same notion, they have no problem feeding the hype and the fire that is causing these riots. Because, if we could just turn the news off, how much more normal will life more than likely be? And it's just crazy to me that you'll feed into their narrative. And I'm sure you have a friend that flipped open their social media account, took some of their headlines and went and posted something politically incorrect, causing an ever greater divide between their friends and their family, along with this great divide that we are now experiencing in society. And don't let me belittle the problems at hand. The fact that these companies were also showing, the George Floyd videos, I think it's incredible that they can shine a light on problems that, we haven't been able to solve in society for a long time, let alone see if it wasn't for everybody having cameras in their pockets. But in the same notion, they don't care about you. They don't care about the benefit of society, the mental health of society. They just want what makes money. And at the end of the day, guys, how many of you forgot there was even a pandemic going on? It's crazy to me that most people aren't even aware pandemic numbers are dropping in the US and Canada at a pretty decent rate. Now, after these riots, are they going to go up? I have no idea. I'm not trying to make those predictions. But in the same heartbeat, we're being manipulated. We're being controlled by these conglomerates, and they definitely affect the stock market in a very, very major way. Now, how do we capitalize on this? Because I'm not talking about buying these companies. These could almost be considered sin stocks at the rate they post stuff and the way they cause all these headaches to society. Really think about it. Are these companies benefiting society in a positive manner? Look at the shitstorm that was caused from the last election cycle and all the BS and the fake news that gets spread, and the fact that we get so caught up into it that we're not willing to put our energy or our time toward benefiting our family, our own lives, our working situation. But I'm not going to go on about that. But how do you make money? Because you don't need to buy them to make a stupid amount of money. I'm going to give you two examples here that I've personally seen work excessively well for myself and other investors out there. And the first one we're going to talk about is what I call a hype train creation. The way these media companies can stir what I call a hype train, and this works on the other spectrum, which we're going to take a look at in a second. But essentially, let me use a couple examples here. You might remember Pokemon Go. Remember when that was a huge fad? Go back to when Pokemon Go was popular and look at Nintendo stock. You could have bought it in any time in the first 3 months Pokemon Go came out, and you would have made a crap ton of money because there was so much hype around that company with that very popular game. Now let's take a look at something that I've made a stupid amount of money off of, Canopy Growth Corp. And I actually went in with this exact strategy here, guys, because I was buying Canopy in the $2 to $3 range, not because I thought the fundamentals were good, not because I thought the company was good or anything like that. It was just the pure fact that I could recognize that this is going to become legal. And when it becomes legal, this is going to explode because everybody and their grandmother would be talking about it. And sure enough, come 2018, just toward, November in 2018, boom, we legalized it, stock exploded. And if you didn't catch that hype train early enough, well, we know how that story ended up going. Now, what's another good example that I've taken advantage of on this? Now, this is kind of the opposite spectrum of when, the media pressures to the downside the stock market in general and individual companies. And there's no better example than this than, of course, Tesla stock. I was buying Tesla back in the 300s only to watch the media just destroy this company. They crapped on this company so hard, it pressured it down more than 50%, all the way down into the 170 range. And a lot of people recognize this. They picked it up. And this was a hard one, in my opinion, to pick up because with all that hate, there wasn't a good balance sheet backing it up to actually make it, for an investor to recognize as a very deep value value stock, but I didn't even buy it down here. I was buying it in the 300s. I watched it dip. I was too scared. I was just sitting on the sidelines watching what was going on. And then when I saw the hype train start coming the other way, I started kind of cost averaging up in the 400s, which worked to my benefit immensely. But maybe you're not one of those kind of investors. Maybe you are just a dividend cost average investor. Well, how else do you take advantage of this? Well, again, guys, what they say in the news doesn't always represent what's going on in reality. And Jim Cramer makes an incredible quote where he says, the stock market does not have ears, cannot hear what people are saying. The stock market doesn't have eyes. It can't see what's going on. So here's another great example, guys, is RioCan. RioCan, if you go back into the long-term history of its chart, this was a company that just got destroyed, slaughtered back in the 2008 financial crisis. But this was a company that I understood very well, it was incredibly capitalized, trading well below, its asset value. And most of their tenants are considered essential workers, making it so they're still collecting 80% of their income. And if we skip to the year to date, guys, does that deserve the stock to have a wicked, 50, 60% to the downside reaction? Well, it seemed like it because the news was just hammering the end of the world. It's all coming, but it pushed it way too far to the downside to the point where I was buying it for my mom, my girlfriend's parents. I was loading the boat. I was using credit to buy into this. Now, I can't recognize every stock that's going to be on value. I just need to be able to recognize one or two, and this was definitely one of them. So I loaded the boat, guys. My average buy is like $14.50 from the new purchases that I've made, and we're starting to make a stupid profit. I am now looking at a 30% capital gain. I'm going to make a whole separate video on this today just to talk about what is going on here because I think it's fascinating. But to give you another perspective, and this is going to be a hard perspective because, we all know Buffett sold out of the airlines. And same with something like a Carnival Cruise, right? Let's use Carnival Cruise as the first example. It's incredible what a profit machine Carnival was until this happened. It was one of the hardest hit companies on the planet. And I think people aren't even aware that, Saudi Arabia dumped $200 million, I believe, into Carnival at something like, what did it end up hitting there? It was at something like $12 a share. There's people in our chat group that picked up Carnival Cruise at $8 a share. At some point in time, you have to recognize when things are just way, way too below their asset value. And if you can just sit on it for a year, even if they come back only making 50% of the profits they did, it's still way more value than the stock is implying. And taking a look, guys, if you were buying it down there, you would have made a 201% return. Too many people get controlled and manipulated by the narrative we hear in the news. And as Buffett says, you should not let what happens in the news control your investment philosophies. Now, if something happened in society that you think changes the fundamentals of your company, you're going to have to recognize that. And yeah, it might not be a bad idea to sell out. But if you're one of those people that have just been sitting on the sidelines thinking that you're actually going to be getting ahead, even though you can't predict what the markets are going to do tomorrow, I think you're being an idiot because you're just getting caught up in the broader spectrum of the narrative. So what is going on with the markets now then? Why are they going up? The news isn't actually getting any better. And I'm going to try and explain this because, like I said, guys, the news doesn't always correlate to reality. The stock market, though, can react on the news, especially considering 90% of the media that we consume is controlled by these 6 bloody companies that really dictate the narrative that we have our table conversations. But to most people that get caught up in the broader spectrum of the narrative, keep forgetting that on a macro level, there are companies that are performing exceptionally well here. And the two primary reasons I can see why the markets have gone up in these terrible, treacherous times, we should say, is because inflation is a big thing. People keep forgetting that when the governments print off trillions of dollars, real estate prices go up. Asset prices, stock prices go up. And why does that happen? Well, it's because if you understand the basics behind inflation, for those of you that don't understand inflation, let me break it down in very simple terms. Let's say this is the only coffee mug that exists. Well, it means it might be pretty valuable to you if this is some rare coffee cup. But the fact is there's thousands of these coffee cups. They're being made constantly, so therefore they only cost $1. The same thing works with your currency. Your currency is valued based on how much is being printed off, thus the term inflation. The the more money they print, the more it devalues the currency that's currently out in the market. And then what ends up happening is people don't want to hold cash. People want to hold something that will go up if the dollar goes down. And that could be gold. That could be any hard asset. That could be real estate, stock prices. And that's what is starting to happen here in the market. Now, the second big thing is, again, on a macro level, if you can just block out the noise, there are companies that are going to make a stupid amount of money off this pandemic. And I've talked about this a lot with things like prison stocks, GEO Group. And on a more larger scale level, I mean, you could say Microsoft, you could say Apple, you could say Amazon and Facebook. These are companies where everybody's locked inside, highly using the cloud computing, highly using these products and services. Therefore, meaning that, yeah, these conglomerates that already dominate the market are going to continue to dominate on an even higher level. So even though the entire stock market isn't doing well, it doesn't take a lot for those few companies to drive the rest of the market up. And I'm hoping through everything we've talked about here, you're starting to realize the reality of you need to have bulletproof skin, baby. You got to have rhino thick skin to deal with the media, and you have to have the moral fortitude to stand up against the opinions that are being manipulated by these six conglomerates. And it's so crazy to me, to the storm that they cause. Now, how do you kind of get moral fortitude? What is the best way? There's no better way than through education, because I can recognize when stocks are undervalued. How do I do that? Well, it's as simple as just learning how balance sheets work, looking and listening to CEO conference calls. And if I can recommend something that has an insane amount of value behind it, head on over to the passiveincomeeducator.com. This is one of our websites, guys. I made a video on understanding a balance sheet for beginners. I mean, I took on a massive challenge with this video, and I share with you so many fundamentals so you can recognize this kind of value in the market. Because like the good old Buffett says, when the streets are bloody red, just bleeding everywhere, that is the time that you can just get insanely rich, guys. You know, be fearful when those are greedy, and greedy when those are fearful. But somehow people keep forgetting that when things get fearful, you have to bite that bullet, have insanely tough skin to stand up against it. So let me know what you guys think in that comment section below. I think this is a fascinating strategy that too many people overlook. And once you've learned this strategy, you will recognize when you hold great companies that sometimes might get flack. A lot of good companies can get flack. Look at something like a Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, one of the three largest banks in the US, hit lows that were so unbelievable because they just kept getting an endless amount of crap media pushing them. And I mean, a lot of people bought in at those bottoms. Again, Delta Airlines, Carnival Cruise, some of the banks, the financials, there's just so much opportunity. Now, things don't get good overnight, guys. I always attest to a cost average investing, long-term buy and hold strategy. So when you can recognize this happening to companies you love, I mean, take advantages on those dips. But stay cool, stay awesome, and I can't wait to catch you tomorrow.